The Whisperer in the Shadows. Chapter 1, The Awakening. Daleina's eyes slowly fluttered open. The world was a blur of gray and brown, the color of the wasteland. Her head was pounding, and she groaned as she tried to sit up. As her vision cleared, she saw the desolate landscape stretching out before her. Buildings lay in ruins, and the sky was a hazy orange as if the sun was always setting. Slowly, she pieced together what had happened. She had been scavenging with her group when they were ambushed by raiders. They had fought back fiercely, but in the end, only Daleina had survived. She tried to remember where she was supposed to go next, but her thoughts were jumbled, and her memories felt like they were slipping away. As she struggled to her feet, she noticed something strange. There were ghosts everywhere, drifting through the ruins of the city. She had seen ghosts before, but never so many in one place. They were all around her, whispering and moaning. She tried to ignore them, but their presence was overwhelming. Suddenly, a voice cut through the cacophony of ghostly whispers. "Hello there," the voice said. Daleina whirled around, her hand on the knife at her belt. Standing in front of her was a woman with long, dark hair and piercing green eyes. She was dressed in a flowing gown that seemed to shimmer in the light. "My name is Sirana," the woman said, "and I've been watching you." Daleina was taken aback. She had never heard of anyone named Sirana before. "Watching me?" she said, her voice hoarse. "Yes," Sirana replied. "You have a gift, Daleina. A gift that could save humanity." Daleina frowned. "What gift?" she asked. Sirana smiled. "The ability to communicate with the dead," she said. Daleina shook her head. "I don't understand," she said. Sirana reached out and placed a hand on Daleina's forehead. Suddenly, a flood of images and emotions rushed through Daleina's mind. She saw herself as a child, playing with her siblings. She saw her parents, who had been killed in the early days of the apocalypse. And she saw the raiders who had attacked her group, their faces twisted in rage. When the images faded, Daleina stumbled back, gasping for air. "What was that?" she said, her heart racing. "That was a glimpse of your power," Sirana said. "You can speak with the dead, to learn their secrets and their stories. And with that knowledge, you could help to save humanity." Daleina stared at Sirana in disbelief. "How?" she said. Sirana smiled. "Come with me," she said. "I'll show you." Daleina hesitated for a moment, but something in Sirana's eyes made her trust the woman. She nodded and followed Sirana through the ruins of the city. As they walked, Sirana explained more about the ghosts that Daleina had been seeing. "They're lost souls," she said. "Trapped between life and death. They're desperate for someone to hear their stories and help them find peace." Daleina listened, fascinated. She had always been drawn to the stories of the dead, but she had never imagined that she could communicate with them. Finally, they arrived at an old, abandoned building. Sirana led Daleina inside and up a flight of stairs. At the top of the stairs was a door, and Sirana pushed it open. Inside was a small room, lit by a single candle. In the center, Daleina had a feeling that she wasn't alone. She turned around, scanning the room, and there, in front of her, was a strange figure. The figure was tall and slender with flowing robes, and her eyes glinted in the dim light. Daleina's heart skipped a beat as she realized the figure was staring directly at her. She wanted to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself, then spoke up. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The figure didn't answer but instead beckoned to Daleina with a graceful hand. "Follow me," she said in a voice that sounded like a song. "I have something to show you." Daleina hesitated, unsure if she could trust this strange figure. But something about her drew Daleina in, and she found herself following the figure out of the room and into the hallway. As they walked, Daleina took a closer look at the figure and realized that she had never seen anyone like her before. Her skin was a deep shade of blue, and her hair was long and silver, cascading down her back like a waterfall. The figure led Daleina down a winding staircase and through a door that led to the outside. Daleina followed her out into the cool night air, and there, in front of her, was the most breathtaking sight she had ever seen. The sky was a deep shade of purple, and the stars shone brighter than Daleina had ever seen. The moon was full and hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Daleina gasped in awe as she took in the sight before her. The figure turned to Daleina, her eyes sparkling in the moonlight. "This is my world," she said. "The world of the dead." Daleina's heart raced as she realized what the figure meant. She had been communicating with the spirits of the dead. She tried to back away, but the figure gently took her hand and pulled her closer. "Do not be afraid," she said. "You have a gift. You can communicate with the dead. You are a ghost whisperer." Daleina stared at the figure, unsure of what to say. She had never believed in ghosts or spirits, but now she had no choice but to accept that they were real and that she had the power to communicate with them. The figure continued. "There is a reason why you have been given this gift. The world is in danger, and only you can help save it." Daleina was confused. "What do you mean? How can I help save the world?" The figure smiled. "I am Sirana, the nymph of freedom. And I need your help to save humanity from destruction." Daleina's head was spinning. She had so many questions, but before she could ask them, Sirana reached out and touched her forehead. Suddenly, Daleina was filled with a rush of energy. She felt a surge of power flowing through her, and she knew that her life would never be the same again. Sirana looked at Daleina, her eyes serious. "You must come with me. There is much to do, and time is running out." Daleina nodded, knowing that she had no choice. She had been chosen for a reason, and she couldn't let the world be destroyed. With a deep breath, Daleina took Sirana's hand, and together they disappeared into the night, leaving the world of the living behind. Chapter 2: The Encounter. Daleina stood at the entrance of the cave, taking deep breaths to steady her nerves. The darkness inside was thick and suffocating, and she could hear strange noises echoing from within. Nevertheless, she knew that she had to keep going. The fate of humanity depended on her. As she took a step forward, a figure appeared from the shadows. It was Shanta, her trusted friend and ally. They had met years ago, back when the world was still normal, and had forged a bond that had survived even the apocalypse. "Daleina, are you sure about this?" Shanta asked, her voice trembling slightly. Daleina nodded, trying to mask her fear. "I have to be sure. We need to find out what's causing the spirits to become restless, and if there's any way we can stop it." Shanta hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay, I'll go with you. But we have to be careful. This place is dangerous." Daleina smiled gratefully, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She knew that she couldn't do this alone. Together, they made their way deeper into the cave, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The darkness was overwhelming, and Daleina had to focus on her breathing to keep her panic at bay. As they walked, they began to hear strange whispers, like the voices of the dead. Daleina recognized them as the same voices she had been hearing in her dreams. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but their tone was urgent and pleading. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, and the cave began to shake. Daleina stumbled, grabbing onto Shanta's arm for support. "What's happening?" Shanta cried, her eyes wide with fear. Daleina shook her head, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. She knew that they had to get out of there, and fast. As they turned to leave, a figure appeared from the shadows. It was Sirana, the nymph of freedom. She was even more beautiful than Daleina had imagined, with a graceful, bird-like body and a face that seemed to radiate wisdom and power. "Greetings, mortals," Sirana said, her voice echoing through the cave. "I have been waiting for you." Daleina and Shanta froze, unsure of what to do. They had heard of Sirana before, but they had never imagined that they would meet her. "What do you want from us?" Daleina asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "I have a proposition for you," Sirana said, her eyes flashing with a strange light. "I can help you save humanity, but you must first prove your worth to me." "How?" Shanta asked, her voice trembling. Sirana smiled, a faint glimmer of amusement in her eyes. "There is a powerful spirit trapped in this cave, one that can grant wishes. If you can release it, I will aid you in your quest to save humanity." Daleina and Shanta exchanged a look, both feeling a sense of unease. They knew that nothing in this world came without a cost. "Very well," Daleina said, her voice firm. "We accept your challenge." Chapter 3, The Journey Begins. Daleina and Shanta began their journey to find Sirana, the nymph of freedom, with nothing but a few supplies and a map of the surrounding area. They walked for hours, through the barren wasteland that was once a bustling city, now reduced to ruins by the apocalypse. As they walked, they came across small pockets of survivors, huddled together in makeshift camps, scavenging for food and water. Daleina and Shanta offered what little help they could, giving out some of their supplies and offering words of encouragement to those they met. As the sun began to set, the two women found themselves at the edge of a vast desert, stretching out before them as far as the eye could see. According to their map, they needed to cross this desert to reach their destination. Daleina and Shanta set up camp at the edge of the desert, knowing that they would need to conserve their energy and resources for the journey ahead. As they sat around the fire, Shanta pulled out a small leather-bound book from her bag. "What's that?" asked Daleina, curious. "It's a journal," replied Shanta. "I've been writing down everything we've seen and experienced since the apocalypse. It helps me make sense of it all." Daleina nodded in understanding. "Can I see?" Shanta handed her the book, and Daleina began to read. She was impressed by Shanta's writing, and how she was able to capture the essence of their journey so far. As she read, Daleina felt a sense of gratitude towards Shanta, for being her companion in this dangerous world. As they settled down for the night, Daleina couldn't help but think about the task that lay ahead of them. Finding Sirana, the nymph of freedom, seemed like an impossible task, but she knew that they had to try. The fate of humanity was in their hands, and they couldn't afford to fail. With that thought in mind, Daleina drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the journey that lay ahead. Chapter 4, The Spirit World. Daleina woke up to a strange sensation. Her Her body was weightless, and she felt like she was floating. She tried to open her eyes, but everything was dark. She couldn't see anything, but she could hear voices whispering around her. "Welcome to the spirit world," a voice said. Daleina recognized the voice. It was Sirana. "Sirana," she called out. "Yes, it's me," Sirana replied. "You have entered the spirit world. Here, you will learn to communicate with the dead and unlock the secrets of your powers." Daleina tried to sit up, but she couldn't move. She was still weightless, and she realized that she didn't have a physical body. "Don't worry, you're not dead," Sirana said. "Your physical body is still in the mortal world, but your spirit has entered the spirit world. You will return to your body when the time comes." Daleina felt relieved but also confused. She had never believed in the afterlife or the spirit world, and now she was in it. "Where are we?" she asked. "We are in the realm of the spirits," Sirana replied. "This is where the dead reside, and where their spirits go after they leave their physical bodies. It is also where the spirits of the living can come to communicate with them." Daleina looked around, but she still couldn't see anything. She felt a presence next to her, and she turned to face it. "Who are you?" she asked. "I am the spirit of a woman who died a long time ago," the spirit replied. "I am here to help you understand your powers and guide you on your journey." Daleina felt a shiver run down her spine. She was talking to a dead person, but she couldn't see them. "How do I communicate with you?" she asked. "Close your eyes and focus on my voice," the spirit said. "You will learn to see and hear us in time." Daleina closed her eyes and focused on the spirit's voice. Slowly, the darkness around her began to fade, and she saw a faint light in the distance. "Walk towards the light," the spirit said. "It will take you to where you need to go." Daleina followed the spirit's instructions and walked towards the light. As she got closer, she saw that it was a gateway of some sort, with a figure standing in front of it. The figure was tall and imposing, with a cloak covering their face. They held a staff in one hand and a sword in the other. "Who are you?" Daleina asked. "I am the guardian of the gateway," the figure replied. "Only those who are worthy may pass through." "I am here to learn about my powers," Daleina said. "Very well," the guardian said. "But be warned, the journey ahead will be dangerous. You must be prepared for anything." Daleina nodded, and the guardian stepped aside, allowing her to pass through the gateway. As she stepped through the gateway, Daleina felt a surge of energy. She opened her eyes and found herself back in her physical body, lying on the ground. She sat up and looked around, realizing that she was in a different part of the forest than where she had fallen asleep. She knew that her journey had just begun and that she had much to learn about her powers and the spirit world. Chapter 5: The Betrayal. Daleina woke up to the sound of rustling leaves and snapping twigs. She bolted upright, her heart pounding in her chest. Shanta was still sleeping soundly beside her, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Daleina scanned her surroundings, trying to find the source of the noise. She spotted a figure moving stealthily through the trees, their movements graceful and fluid. Daleina's hand instinctively went to the hilt of her knife as she watched the figure approach. As the figure drew closer, Daleina could see that it was a young man with a lithe build and short cropped hair. He wore a leather vest over a tunic and trousers, and a pair of boots that looked well worn. "Who are you?" Daleina demanded, her voice low and steady. The young man didn't answer. regarded Daleina with a curious expression, his eyes taking in her features. After a long moment, he spoke. "You're the one they call the Ghost Whisperer," he said, his voice laced with a hint of admiration. Daleina narrowed her eyes. "How do you know that?" "I've been tracking you for days," the young man said. "I have a message for you." Daleina gestured for him to continue. "The nymph Sirana wishes to speak with you," the young man said. "She says she has information that will be of great importance to you." Daleina felt a shiver run down her spine at the mention of Sirana's name. She had never met the nymph, but she had heard stories about her from other survivors. They said that Sirana was a powerful being who could grant wishes and make dreams come true. But they also said that she was dangerous and that those who crossed her rarely lived to tell the tale. "Where is she?" Daleina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The young man shrugged. "I don't know. She didn't say. But she did say that if you want to find her, you should head to the ruins of the old city." Daleina frowned. The old city was a dangerous place, crawling with scavengers and mutants. But she knew that she had to follow Sirana's lead if she wanted to save humanity from destruction. "Thank you," Daleina said to the young man. "What's your name?" The young man smiled. "Call me Remy." And with that, he vanished into the trees, leaving Daleina and Shanta alone once again. Daleina stared after him for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that she had to go to the old city, but she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. She would have to navigate treacherous terrain, avoid deadly traps, and outsmart dangerous enemies. But she also knew that she couldn't do it alone. "Daleina, what's going on?" Shanta asked, her voice thick with sleep. Daleina turned to face her friend, a determined look on her face. "We're going to the old city," she said. "We have a mission to save humanity, and we can't do it without Sirana's help." Shanta looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Okay," she said. "Let's do this." And with that, Daleina and Shanta set off on their journey to the ruins of the old city, determined to find Sirana and uncover the secrets that could save humanity from destruction. Chapter 6: The Escape. Daleina gasped as she emerged from the darkness into the blinding sunlight. She shielded her eyes with her hand, taking in her surroundings. She was standing in the middle of a forest, surrounded by tall trees that stretched up towards the sky. The leaves rustled in the wind, and birds chirped in the distance. It was peaceful, but Daleina knew that she couldn't let her guard down. She was in a strange place, and she had no idea what dangers might be lurking nearby. As she looked around, she realized that Shanta was nowhere to be seen. She called out her friend's name, but there was no answer. Panic set in as she realized that she was alone in an unfamiliar place. Daleina. She whirled around at the sound of her name, her heart racing. She saw a figure emerging from the trees, and relief flooded through her as she recognized Shanta. "Thank goodness," Daleina said as Shanta approached her. "I thought I was all alone." "I'm here," Shanta said, placing a reassuring hand on Daleina's shoulder. "But we need to keep moving. We don't know what's out there." Daleina nodded, and the two women set off through the forest. They walked for what felt like hours, with nothing but the sound of their footsteps and the rustling of leaves to keep them company. The forest seemed endless, and Daleina couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping up on her. They had no idea where they were going, and no way of knowing what lay ahead. As they walked, they came across a small stream. Shanta crouched down by the water and took a sip, and Daleina did the same. The water was cool and refreshing, and it gave them both a burst of energy. "We need to find a way out of here," Daleina said as they continued on their journey. "I know," Shanta replied. "But we have no idea where we are or how to get back to our world." Daleina thought for a moment. "Maybe there's someone here who can help us," she said. "Someone who knows how to get back home." "But who?" Shanta asked. "We haven't seen anyone since we got here." Daleina hesitated, then spoke. "What about Sirana?" she asked. "She offered to help us. Maybe she can show us the way." Shanta looked at Daleina skeptically. "Are you sure we can trust her?" she asked. Daleina thought back to their encounter with Sirana, and the strange powers that she possessed. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we don't have any other options." They continued, the forest becoming denser as they walked. Daleina could feel her heart pounding in her chest, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over at Shanta, who looked just as nervous as she did. Suddenly, they heard a rustling in the bushes ahead of them. They froze, listening intently. A moment later, a figure emerged from the undergrowth. It was Sirana. Chapter 7, The Revelation. Daleina opened her eyes to find herself in a dimly lit room. She sat up, her head throbbing with pain, and looked around to get her bearings. The walls were made of stone, and there was a large wooden door on one side. The room was empty except for a small table with a candle and a few books on it. She tried to get up but found that her hands and feet were bound. Just then, the door creaked open, and a tall, imposing figure stepped in. He was dressed in a long black robe with a hood that concealed his face. He walked over to the table and picked up one of the books. "Welcome, Daleina," he said in a deep, menacing voice. "I see you've woken up." Daleina struggled against her bonds. "Who are you? Why am I here?" The figure chuckled. "You're here because you're important to us. As for who I am, let's just say I'm a friend." Daleina's eyes narrowed. "What do you want from me?" The figure placed the book back on the table and turned to face her. "We want you to help us find something. Something very important." "What is it?" Daleina asked. The figure stepped closer, and Daleina could see his eyes glinting in the candlelight. "A powerful artifact that can help us in our fight against the sirens." Daleina's heart skipped a beat. "What do you know about the sirens?" The figure leaned in closer. "More than you can possibly imagine." Daleina didn't know what to make of this mysterious figure. She was still bound and vulnerable, and she didn't trust him. But she had to admit that he knew more about the sirens than anyone else she had ever met. "I'll help you," she said finally. "But only if you tell me everything you know about the sirens." The figure smiled. "Deal." Chapter 8, The Decision. As soon as they arrived at the camp, Daleina knew that she couldn't stay there for long. She needed to talk to Shanta about what she had learned in the spirit world and figure out a plan to stop the council's evil plans. She had to make a decision. As she made her way to Shanta's tent, she noticed how the atmosphere in the camp had changed. The people seemed more anxious and restless than before. She saw some of them glancing in her direction, whispering to each other. Daleina wondered what was going on. When she arrived at Shanta's tent, she found her friend deep in thought, looking at a map of the area. "Shanta," Daleina said, trying to get her attention. Shanta looked up, surprised to see Daleina. "What is it?" she asked. "I went to the spirit world," Daleina said, "and I spoke with Sirana." Shanta's eyes widened. "What did she say?" "She told me that the council is planning something terrible," Daleina replied. "They want to use the spirits to destroy humanity." Shanta's expression turned grim. "We have to stop them," she said. Daleina nodded, relieved that Shanta believed her. "But how?" "Sirana didn't give me any details." "We'll have to figure that out," Shanta said. "But we can't do it alone. We need to get the others on our side." Daleina hesitated. "I don't know if that's possible. The council has been controlling them for so long. They might not even believe us." "We have to try," Shanta said firmly. "We can't let the council destroy everything we've been fighting for." Daleina nodded, knowing that Shanta was right. They had to act quickly. "Okay," she said. "What's our next move?" "We need to talk to the other leaders in the camp," Shanta said. "We have to convince them to join us." Daleina nodded, feeling a sense of purpose. She knew that this was the right thing to do, no matter how difficult it might be. She was ready to fight for what she believed in. Chapter 9: The Confrontation. Daleina sat in front of the fire, her eyes closed as she focused on her breathing. She had been meditating for what felt like hours, trying to clear her mind of the doubts and fears that plagued her. But they kept creeping back in, like shadows in the corner of her vision. She opened her eyes and looked around the small clearing where they had made camp for the night. Shanta was sitting across from her, sharpening her knife with a stone. Daleina watched the rhythmic motion of her arm, the way the blade glinted in the firelight. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Daleina asked, breaking the silence. Shanta looked up at her, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are we the ones who can save the world?" Daleina said, voicing the doubts that had been weighing on her. Shanta set down her knife and leaned forward. "Daleina, we were chosen for a reason. Sirana wouldn't have come to us if she didn't believe we were capable of this. But what if she was wrong? What if we're not strong enough, or smart enough, or brave enough?" Daleina asked, feeling a knot form in her stomach. Shanta reached across the fire and took Daleina's hand. "We're in this together, Daleina. We'll face whatever comes our way, and we'll do it together. That's the only way we'll succeed." Daleina looked down at their clasped hands, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She knew Shanta was right. They had come too far to turn back now. The next morning, they set out early, the forest still shrouded in mist. They walked in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Daleina couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, like they were walking into a trap. As they walked, the trees grew denser, the underbrush thicker. Daleina felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something was watching them. She stopped in her tracks, holding up a hand to signal Shanta to do the same. They both listened, straining to hear any sound. That's when Daleina heard it. A faint rustling, coming from the bushes to her left. She drew her sword, her heart racing. Shanta did the same. They slowly made their way toward the source of the noise, their eyes scanning the bushes for any sign of movement. As they drew closer, the rustling grew louder. Suddenly, a figure burst out of the bushes, brandishing a knife. Daleina barely had time to react before the figure lunged at her. She parried the blow, her sword ringing out as it clashed against the attacker's blade. She looked up, ready to strike again, but what she saw made her freeze. The attacker was a young girl, no more than 16 years old. She had wild, unkempt hair, and her eyes were filled with a manic intensity. Daleina could see that she was thin, her clothes ragged and torn. The girl lunged again, but this time Daleina sidestepped her, knocking her to the ground. The girl scrambled to her feet, her knife still clutched in her hand. "What do you want from us?" Shanta demanded, stepping forward. The girl's eyes flipped to Shanta, then back to Daleina. "You're the ones who are going to save the world, aren't you?" she said, her voice high and thin. Daleina and Shanta exchanged a look. "How do you know that?" Daleina asked. The girl laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You know nothing of what it means to be human," she spat, turning her back on Daleina. Daleina's heart sank as she watched the girl disappear into the crowd. She felt lost, alone, and more confused than ever. What was this strange power that had come over her, and what did it mean? As she stood there, trying to make sense of it all, a hand touched her shoulder. She spun around to see Shanta standing behind her, a concerned look on his face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, half-jokingly. Daleina shook her head, trying to shake off the shock of what had just happened. "It's nothing," she said, though she knew he wouldn't believe her. Shanta studied her for a moment, then took her hand and led her away from the market. "Come on," he said. "Let's get out of here." They walked in silence for a while, until they were well away from the crowds. Finally, Daleina spoke. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Shanta squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together." Daleina looked up at him, grateful for his support. She knew that she could always count on him, no matter what. As they walked, Daleina began to feel a sense of purpose growing within her. She knew that she had a unique ability and that it was up to her to use it for the greater good. But first, she would need to learn how to control it. And there was only one person who could help her do that, Sirana. Chapter 10, The Aftermath. Daleina stumbled through the rubble and debris, her mind in a daze. Her clothes were torn and covered in dust, her body aching from the injuries she had sustained. She looked around her, trying to get her bearings. The world around her was unrecognizable, buildings lay in ruins, and the streets were littered with debris. She looked down at her hand, where the bracelet that Sirana had given her was still clutched tightly. She closed her eyes and concentrated, trying to reach out to the nymph. But there was nothing. Sirana was gone. Daleina sat down on a nearby rock and took a deep breath. She was alone, but she had done it. She had saved humanity. The weight of her accomplishment was almost too much to bear. She looked around her, and for the first time, she felt hope. The world may be broken, but it was also filled with possibilities. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she heard a faint noise in the distance. She looked up to see a group of survivors making their way toward her. They were bruised and battered, but they were alive. "Are you okay?" one of them asked as they approached. Daleina looked up at them, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're all okay." Together, they sat on the rock, sharing stories of their survival and their hopes for the future. They spoke of rebuilding, of starting anew. And for the first time since the apocalypse, Daleina felt a sense of belonging. As the sun began to set, the survivors parted ways, each going in their direction. Daleina watched them go, feeling a sense of loss. But she knew that they would always be connected, bound by the memories of what they had survived. Daleina stood up, her body sore and her heart heavy. She took one last look around her and began to walk, her feet carrying her toward an unknown future. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she was no longer alone. The end. Chapter 11, The New World. Daleina stood atop the hill, gazing out at the world below her. It was a beautiful sight, one she had never seen before. The sun was shining, the sky was blue, and there was a gentle breeze blowing through the trees. Behind her, Shanta approached, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly. Daleina nodded, not taking her eyes off the scene before her. "It's hard to believe that this is the same world we were living in just a few months ago," she said. Shanta stepped up next to her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "We did it, Daleina. We saved humanity." Daleina smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "We did, didn't we?" For a moment, they stood there in silence, simply taking in the view. Then, Daleina turned to Shanta. "What now?" she asked. Shanta shrugged. "I don't know. I suppose we'll have to start rebuilding. There's a lot of work to be done." Daleina nodded. "Yes, there is. But we'll do it together. We've come this far, we can do anything." Shanta grinned. "I like the way you think." Daleina laughed, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but they had each other, and that was enough. Together, they began to make their way down the hill, ready to start the next chapter of their lives. The world was a different place now, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 12, The Epilogue. As the sun began to set on the new world, Daleina stood at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the vast expanse of greenery that had replaced the barren wasteland. She had fulfilled her mission, and humanity was no longer on the brink of extinction. She had lost friends and made new ones, encountered unimaginable creatures, and experienced things beyond her wildest dreams. But now, she felt at peace. Shanta walked up to her and stood by her side, admiring the beauty of the new world. "It's all thanks to you," she said, breaking the silence. Daleina smiled. "No, it was a team effort. We all played a part." They stood there for a few more minutes, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Daleina felt a pang of sadness, realizing that this was the end of her journey. She would miss the adventure, the thrill of the unknown, the feeling of being alive. But she also knew that she was ready to move on to the next chapter of her life. Suddenly, a soft breeze blew, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers. Daleina closed her eyes and took a deep breath, savoring the moment. She knew that no matter what the future held, she would always have this memory to hold on to. As they turned to leave, Shanta looked back one last time, her eyes filled with wonder. "Who knows what other mysteries are out there waiting to be discovered," she said. Daleina smiled, knowing that the adventure never truly ended. There would always be more to explore, more to discover, and more to learn. She was ready for whatever lay ahead. With one last look at the beautiful new world, Daleina and Shanta walked into the sunset, eager to start their next chapter. The end. Thanks for watching this emotional mystery thriller, The Whisperer in the Shadows. I hope you enjoyed following Daleina's journey as she navigates the post-apocalyptic world and discovers her unique abilities. If you haven't already, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more thrilling stories like this one. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my latest uploads. If you have any questions or comments about the story, feel free to leave them down below in the comments section. I'd love to hear from you and discuss your thoughts on the story. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.